And, well, I wanted to talk about a couple of things today. One is this very interesting story. This was actually published several months ago in The Hill, back in March, in fact, when it was clear that Donald Trump was, I believe this was at the point it was clear that he was the Republican nominee. And Jesse Bimes wrote this for The Hill, and the headline is poll: 1 in 4 Americans would consider leaving the United States if Trump wins. And 28% of those surveyed in the Morning Consult Vox poll released Tuesday said they would consider leaving the country if Trump were president. 65% said they would stay. This included 12% of conservatives who said they'd consider moving out of the country if Donald Trump became the president. Very interesting. So would you? I mean, I remember joking in 2000 and 2004 about, George W. Bush is going to be such a disaster. It's time to leave the country. And I guess there were a few people who actually did. But Trump is a fundamentally different animal. I mean, he's just a fundamentally different thing than we've seen before in a whole bunch of different levels. There's the sexual stuff, there's the authoritarian stuff, there's the whipping the Republican Party around stuff, there's, which isn't frankly an issue for me, but I'm guessing, well, I know it is for the Republican Party. And, what would provoke you? Donald Trump, this is clip number 3, Shano. This is Donald Trump was talking on the Howard Stern show about going backstage and scoping out women and getting away with it because he owned the beauty pageants. Here's Donald Trump.
I'll tell you the funniest is that I'll go backstage before a show. Yes. And everyone's getting dressed and ready and everything else. And, no men are anywhere. And I'm allowed to go in because I'm the owner of the pageant, and therefore I'm inspecting it. I'm inspecting. Right, I want to make sure that like everything is good. You're there. Yeah, the dress. Is everyone okay? They're standing there with no clothes. Is everybody okay? And you see these incredible-looking women. And so I sort of get away with things like that.
Yeah, he sort of gets away with things like that. And this is kind of creeping out, pretty much everybody in America. 4 women. He not only owned the Miss Universe contest, he also owned the Miss Teen USA contest. 4 women who competed in the 97 Miss Teen USA beauty pageant said Donald Trump, this is from BuzzFeed, Donald Trump walked into the dressing room while contestants, some as young as 15 years old, were changing. Mariah Bellotto, a former Miss Vermont Teen USA, said, I remember putting on my dress really quick because I was like, oh my God, there's a man in here. Trump, she recalled, said something like, don't worry, ladies, I've seen it all before. Right. And then Ivanka Trump, his daughter, who was 15 at the time, who was the co-host of the Miss Teen USA pageant, when one of the contestants, Bellotto, in fact, said she told Ivanka about Donald Trump entering the room while the girls were changing their clothes, and Bellotto remembers Ivanka answering, yeah, he does that, which is kind of weird. But even weirder is the Republican response to it. This is where I think that you really see what's going on. Okay, so you've got this guy who's arguably, some kind of a pervert, but that's not as bizarre as the Republican Party. Frank Bruni nailed this morning, and it's a subtlety. This is a subtlety, but it's a really important one. Frank Bruni, in his op-ed for the New York Times, Daughters and Trumps, says, as the father of no daughters. Now, Frank Bruni is gay. He's in a relationship with a man, and he's got no children, and he doesn't have a wife. As he points out in the article, as the husband of no wife, I'm offended. He says, as the father of no daughters, I'm appalled by Donald Trump's comments about groping women. And then he points out, Mitch McConnell, for example, this is his first example, but there's no shortage of examples, Mike Pence, all these other guys. Mitch McConnell says, and I quote, as the father of 3 daughters, he was, offended by what Trump said, but not offended enough to withdraw his endorsement of Trump. So Frank Bruni says, what, do you need a 4th daughter? A 5th? Yaki Dreesen, he says, as Yaki Dreesen noted for a post in Vox. So apparently Yaki Dreesen was the first person to figure this out, and then Frank Bruni, and now me. I mean, I read Frank Bruni's piece and said, oh my God, that makes so much sense. As Yaki Dreesen noted in a post for Vox, it cast men in the role of protectors. See, all these Republican men who are coming out and condemning Trump but still endorsing Trump, or even some of the ones who are condemning him and not endorsing him, are doing it in the context of, well, I got a wife, I got daughters. It cast men in the role of protectors and carried a strong whiff of chivalry rather than equality. It also defined women in terms of men and caring about them in terms of their places in men's families. I mean, shouldn't we be offended that half the human race Trump has declared as his playthings? Or at least the attractive fraction of half the human race? Frank Bruni notes the message of that is antithetical to public service and political leadership, which are ideally about representing kin and strangers alike. Well said, Frank. And then, then it gets even stranger. And this is, again, it's like the whole Trump phenomena is allowing us to get a glimpse into the very dark soul of the Republican base, the Republican voter, the whole thing. There's a Republican conservative minister. He's the founder of Pass the Salt Ministries. His name is Dave Daubenmire. And apparently he lost his job as a high school football coach in Ohio after requiring players to pray with him and expressing offensive views about gay people. But this is what he said. He said, here's the point I'm making. We cannot vote for Hillary Clinton because women... let me give you the whole thing. He says, here's the point I'm making. With all that's going on with Trump and everybody screaming and hollering about that, when was the last time your pastor stood up in the pulpit and said, hey, listen, we cannot vote for Hillary Clinton because women are not to have authority over men. If we want to follow the Bible, that would sure be a good place to start, wouldn't it? Rather than worrying so much about the immorality of a sinful man, what about the biblical principle that when a woman rules over a man, it's a sign of judgment from the Lord or of the Lord? In other words, if you're a man and a woman is ruling over you, that's happening because God has cursed you because you have sinned somehow. Which takes it to the next step, which is this piece that Tim Carney wrote, a conservative writer, for the Washington Examiner, which is one of these subsidized right-wing publications here in Washington, D.C. that they pass out for free on the street corners, funded by right-wing foundations. But nonetheless, Timothy Carney writes, power corrupts. That doesn't merely mean that having power can corrupt a person. It also means that people in powerful positions can easily corrupt those around them. We're seeing that with Donald Trump today. This is fascinating. When Ralph Reed waves away comments, when Michelle Bachmann, Trump's comments, when Michelle Bachmann does the same, they're showing the truth of that statement. They have been corrupted by the candidate they back. So Donald Trump is not just showing us his own corruption. He's not just showing us his own love of authoritarianism. He's also showing us who the other people that are corrupted are. They're basically coming out and saying, I was offended by what he said because I have wives and daughters, but I'm still going to endorse him. There's something wrong with that. It's 16 minutes past the hour.